What is up, folks? Jeremy Brand here, the first ever edition of Sunday MMA Church. Stoked to be aboard here with you guys. Stoked to have this. Already got a guy in the comments section. Ren Fraser, I do jiu-jitsu. What's up, man? So do I. I'm glad to hear that that is the case. How long you been training? What kind of jiu-jitsu you training? Gi, no gi? Where do you train? And whatnot. Let's get the show flowing. Obviously, as you can see, we got the talking points over here that we're going to go over. We've got the week in review. We've got LFA and VR, which is sort of, talking about the week in review. We've got a little confessional I want to do. Best bets for this upcoming weekend at UFC 280. And if we do get a guest aboard, he might be chatting about what went on this past week. And then final thoughts. So again, the inaugural edition of MMA Church. I've been wanting to do a live stream for some time now, and I have in the past, but I felt it was time to come back aboard. And Sunday MMA Church will be that for me, and I'll try to get some other MMA journalists and guys from MMA Sucka aboard to join the ship and have fun with us in this. Ren hopping in here. He trains with Cole Miller. That's pretty cool, man. And he trains in the gi and no gi. What belt are you, man? You've been training for a year. You still a white belt? You got your blue belt yet? I myself am a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And look at that. Snake Venom Gaming just subscribed. Hopefully we don't have a ton of those pop up throughout here. It's cool to see them, but at the same time, they distract the crap out of me. But yeah, so again, we'll be going over the stuff that I just talked about. Let's get right into the week in review. Now, this past week, I was lucky to be alive and aboard over at Battlefield Fight League 74. Cage side, I was doing a little filming for the promotion. An amazing card. We got started about half an hour, 45 minutes late, unfortunately, for the YouTube preliminary card. And as you can see, every fight on that preliminary card, if I go down here and show you guys, was a decision. Luckily, that preliminary card ended on time. We got about a 15-20 minute break between that and the main card. And we started off the main card with a banger between Cena Manny and David Chen. Now, I get to see these guys come up through their amateur careers. Pro debut in this fight, so they were allowed to land elbows and whatnot. And it seemed like it was a bit of a, I don't want to say a waiting game, but it was a bit of a waiting game in terms of not knowing when they could land the elbows, not knowing when they could do certain things in comparison to their amateur days. And the cool thing is to see these guys progress from that, to see them move up through the ranks and finally make their pro debuts. To see David drop Cena in the first round, looked like he could get the finish. And then Cena ended up in the second round landing a Darce choke. He had that locked up earlier in the fight as well, but wasn't able to finish, and he finally got it. And that was one of the, there were only 3 stoppages, finishes on this card. So it seemed to drag, but we were out of there quite early for the amount of fights that were on the card. And I just want to talk about some of the other fights that went on. Makinde Adewayami defeated Brandon Lebrecht. This was a unanimous decision. Judges were very... It's hard to say exactly how the judging was on this card, because there were some that they got right, definitely, completely right, and there were others where they just weren't sure whether the decisions were what they should be. And a lot of the fans didn't think that it was the right call. There were split decisions. There were majority draws. This one itself ended up being, it could have gone either way. As a fan, I felt like Brandon won the fight. But as a judge, I mean, it could have gone either way. So I wasn't mad with this one. Gagan Gill against Adam DeFreitas. This one was a banger. DeFreitas was landing straight shots, super clean punches in the first round. And then in the second round, Gagan came out and he was able to land some strikes. And on the ground, the ground and pound, man, this guy had bombs in his hands. And he was able to really just land bombs and get the, like, Adam couldn't even get up to his feet after the second round finished. And the doctor had to finally stop it. I was surprised the referee didn't stop it, but the doctor ended up stopping it in between the second and the third round as Adam could barely even get to his stool. So props to Gagan Gill. In the next fight, not co-main event, right before the co-main event, Tristan Connolly, former UFC fighter, returned to the Battlefield Fight League cage to take on Xavier Nash. Now, Xavier hadn't been inside the cage in some time. This was his Battlefield Fight League debut, and he looked fantastic. He took Tristan down at will. Tristan looked like it was a jiu-jitsu match for him, and Xavier got the unanimous decision on this card. Tristan did not look pleased with his performance, but I'm sure we will see this guy back inside the cage in the not-so-distant future. Now, the co-main event, Matteo Vogel, 6-2 going into this fight. Taylor Christopher, 2-0 going into this fight for the Battlefield Fight League Featherweight Championship. Vogel was the champion. Looked amazing in his last fight against Nick Willett. It was a jiu-jitsu shootout. And then in this one, Taylor looked like he was having his way with Matteo, other than the fact that Vogel was landing some serious leg kicks, which could have halted Taylor's forward progression. It didn't seem to. He was landing the crisper strikes. He had Matteo bloodied up. And then in the third round, not so late into it, I might say, 52 seconds into the third round, Taylor threw a strike. Matteo ended up countering it, taking him down, and landing some ground and pound that I had never seen out of Matteo. Matteo's usually a guy who goes in there and gets submission victories, but his hands were power. He was able to throw down the shots. And Matteo Vogel, man, some TKO, ended up becoming 7-2. Not sure what they can do with this guy next. In his post-fight speech, he said he wanted to step up in competition. I don't think that was a slag to Taylor. I think that was the fact that, again, he was 6-2 coming into this. Taylor was 2-0. So I think he wants someone with a bigger record, because to get on the UFC's eyes, it's not necessarily going to be, beating these guys who are fresh into their pro careers, but instead it's going to be beating guys who have names. And Matteo Vogel is a guy who's a name you're going to want to look out for. His leg kicks looked great. His jiu-jitsu is phenomenal, and he's one to watch. The main event, Dejan Kajic. What can I say about this guy? Man, 3-division champ under Battlefield Fight League. He's fought the who's who in the promotion, local guys, and now he's fought a former Bellator and Bare Knuckle FC fighter in JC Lamas. JC was a very unorthodox fighter. He threw spinning stuff. He threw punches that looped and came out of nowhere, and Dejan Kajic was able to utilize his technical prowess. If you've seen the interview that I did with him prior to this fight, he is a mathematics wizard when it comes to statistics inside the cage. He notices your footwork. He notices when you take a slight step to the left. He notices when your head bobs to the right. He just sees this stuff, and he was able to pick JC apart, earning the unanimous decision and being undefeated in his last 7 fights. Now, he's 38 years old. I'm not sure what you do with a guy like Dejan Kajic. But you know what? He's doing this. He's running his own school at Universal. He's turning fighters into legitimate threats inside local cages. So props to this guy. And it was a fantastic card at Battlefield Fight League. So just so you guys know, you can check that out on UFC Fight Pass, Battlefield Fight League 74. Fantastic card. That was the week in review in terms of that. Let's move over to UFC Fight Night Grasso versus, I don't want to butcher her name, but Araujo. That was last night at in UFC Fight Night Grasso versus Araujo. Where am I here? Sorry, guys, but there we go. Interesting card. I will say that I had it on in the background. I was doing other stuff, and some fantastic fights on this card. But obviously, the main event, Alexa Grasso earning the unanimous decision against Vivian Arujo. The co-main event was Jonathan Martinez. Now, this kid put on a performance. Cub Swanson looked pretty good in there. In the first round, he was landing crisp strikes. He was able to take the fight to the canvas. But holy crap, the leg kicks from Jonathan Martinez were what sealed the deal. He was able to brutalize that front lead leg and drop Swanson with it. And wow, amazing fight. Dusko Todorovic against Jordan Wright. Jordan looked fantastic again. Another one where the loser ended up looking wicked in the opening round, but in later round, in the second round, he did not look the way he should. Not necessarily the way he should, but Dusko ended up earning the TKO in the second round, and that was fun. A very fun fight was Rafael Assunção versus Victor Henry. Both these guys went back and forth. I was surprised it was a 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards, but I'm not mad at the fact that Rafael Assunção won this fight. Victor Henry is a guy who's been around for what seems like ever, but just got his UFC start about a year ago, I believe. And he's a guy who should have been in there for a while. He's tutelage of Josh Barnett. I saw him fight live in Washington what seems like a decade ago, and he's got the skills to back it up. He's fun to watch. He's fought overseas in Japan. This loss is not necessarily a setback for him in terms of what he's going to do in his career because, again, he's a lot of fun to watch. So, I believe that's one other thing I wanted to talk about week in review. UFC 280 is this weekend. We could talk about this. We might not talk about it because, we have the MMA Sucka podcast hosted by Tim Wheaton and Fraser Crone, and I don't want to get in the way of that, so I'm not going to go over these fights, but I do want to talk about the fact that Alexander Volkanovski has revealed that he will serve as the backup for UFC 280 main event after being cleared to return from injury. Interesting take. The guy has not fought at this weight division in the UFC, but could serve as the backup. Do we see either main event fighter pulling out or not making it to the cage? You never know. It could happen. Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev is a fun fight. Many people are unsure of how they're going to pick this fight, and it would throw a real loop in the whole thing if one of them pulled out and Alexander Volkanovski ended up being the guy in there inside the cage. Let me know what you guys think of this, because I was sort of baffled when I heard that he was going to serve as it. I saw Henry Cejudo had something to say about it, but just very interesting case played out. All right, let's move forward. As we said, talking points here. We will move through. We did the weekend review, and we'll talk LFA and VR. Now, last weekend, we had Mark Zuckerberg take over the UFC Apex. Media weren't allowed to be there. Fans weren't allowed to be there. At the Apex, you're not so uncertain of fans being there. Obviously, that's the case. Fans don't necessarily end up coming and joining the show at the Apex, but fighters' family come, media are allowed to be there and whatnot. But Mark Zuckerberg bought it out. And I know that last week on the MMA Sucka podcast, Fraser had his thoughts about this. Tim had his thoughts about this. And I'll leave my thoughts out of it, but we see what it sort of became. It became Mark Zuckerberg and Meta coming into this, obviously not with the UFC because they hold the monopoly and they're huge. But with LFA, which is a feeder league for the UFC, they've put it into VR. And it's pretty cool the way this played out. I'm going to show you a video from Kaposa. He posted it over on Twitter. And it was of what the VR looks like, if I ever get this to load. It was what the VR looked like during during the show. So I don't know how he got this. I don't have a VR myself. I don't have a headset, but I'm not sure how one gets screen grabs of this. But here it is. I will press play on the video for you guys and just sort of show you what it looks like. It's pretty cool. He's above the cage, sort of what it looks like where and then the guy flies up over the cage, which is like right next to you. Referee telling him to get down, or commission trying to tell him to get down, whoever that is there. Um, Super cool that you're right basically with the action. Obviously, you can't get inside the cage because that would add another element to the whole thing with a camera in the cage somehow. But you're above it where the majority of the cameramen would be, and that cameraman is obviously the one that has controls of the VR and your head. But your headset, you're moving around. I don't know how the hell this works. News to me. I am not. I am no. I have no technical prowess when it comes to virtual reality. I've played it myself at this place called Sandbox up here in Vancouver. Fun experience. Nothing like this, I might add. But this seems like you're right in the action. What are you? I want to know what your thoughts are about VR in in MMA because it could be cool. It I don't know. Will we ever see it in the UFC? Who knows? Obviously, they have stakes with UFC Fight Pass, so it's in LFA. Will we see it with other promotions? I have no clue. Could it be cool? Definitely. Will it make me want to buy a VR headset just to be within the action? Definitely not. So let's move forward with the talking points and go over some of my confessions. One confession, in fact. I want to say MMA has become too much. Far too much, I might add. I have UFC Fight Pass. I'm a giant MMA fan. If you didn't know, I started MMA Sucka back in 2009. Came off of a whim. I started it with iWeb, which is a Mac software. Let's actually get this comment in here first before we go over anything. Let's adjust this and bring it up onto the screen and put it over my face and whatnot. Just adjusting this. But Kevin Nicholson says, for the life of me, I cannot see any value in putting goggles on your face to watch a live event. Hope you don't watch with friends because it will be blocked out and ignored. Yeah, no kidding. That is definitely the case. It seems redundant to me to have goggles on unless everybody in your home is going to have goggles on and then you guys look like a bunch of trolls. But if you're sitting there by yourself, it could be cool for a one-off, but I couldn't see doing this every single weekend of MMA action. Again, it seems redundant and sort of stupid to me. I don't know. Maybe we put out a poll on Twitter and get people's comments and whatnot to see what their thoughts are on VR and goggles and whatnot in MMA. I'd love to hear what Dana White has to think about this and obviously the reason for it not being in the UFC and instead being with LFA. It'd be interesting to hear what he has to say about it. I'm sure one of the media members will ask him if he had a chance to check it out and whatnot. But confessions, as I was saying, I started this on a whim. I started it with iWeb. I built it to where it is today, and it's become a mind of its own. In the beginning, I had to bring my laptop and my computer with me everywhere on vacation, whatnot. I had to do live events. Anytime there was breaking news, I had to do it. MMA Sucka has become a little different since then. We're still the live events. We blow up for live events. That's where 99% of our traffic comes from, our results. But we don't necessarily do all the breaking news anymore. And that's just because there's just far too many people out there doing that. When I say MMA has become too much, the UFC is on almost every weekend. We have Bellator every few weeks. We have LFA. We have local shows. UFC Fight Pass has something like a dozen shows, if not more, every single week. It's just so goddamn tough for me to keep up with MMA, let alone the UFC and everything else going on. I just don't see why I understand why there's so much. Everybody has a love for it. Now, if we're comparing it to other sports out there, combat sports, yesterday there was a couple boxing events that played out. Did I watch them? Nope. I'm a combat sports lover, but I did not watch because my mind is like friggin' jello. It's there's far too much going on. What do we do about it? Absolutely nothing because it's just going to continue to grow. You know what catches my attention more than anything? Live jujitsu, grappling. Why? Because I train it, for one, but for two, it's just starting to blow up so much. Gordon Ryan has become the man over the past few years, and he's put a spotlight on grappling and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. But MMA has become the same. Each and every weekend, we get the same. There's some fantastic fights. Will I watch those fights? And will I watch UFC 280 this weekend? Definitely. But again, it has become far too much for me. Let me know what your thoughts are on that, because is MMA too much for you? It's definitely too much for me. Sorry, just a second here. We might get a guest coming on here in a few seconds here, and he might talk about a few other things as well. But just so you guys know, again, do I think the UFC is too much? Yes. Do I think MMA is too much? Yes. When there are I couldn't even tell you how many live fights there are in a calendar year of MMA. You go over to Tapology and you look at this week's list of MMA events. I guarantee you there's 20 plus MMA events this week, let alone the year in itself. Why? Because MMA blew up and it is what it is. Is it mainstream? Not even close yet. We got Sunday football. Obviously, there's a dozen games in football every Sunday, but it's once a week, and you get all of them in one day. That's a national sport. MMA, the NFL is the monopoly. The UFC is the monopoly, but we're getting this every single week. And how many fights? If you want to watch a live UFC event, you got to put in hours. And then there's the commercials, and then there's the advertisements, and then there's the talk and talk and talk, and then you get a fight. And it could end in 5 seconds, it could end in 10 seconds, it could end in 15 minutes, you might get a decision. I just there's too much MMA for me, man. I don't know what you guys think, but if you guys are watching this later and you're not catching the live stream, let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are, because I personally think MMA is far too much. All right, moving forward, we've got, as I said, we've got best bets. We're going to bring that aboard. We're going to look at it. I'm going to check things out, and I'm going to tell you my thoughts on the lines and whether there are any underdogs that we should be looking for at the Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev fight. Well, Islam is the favorite, which is absolutely ludicrous. Should he be a favorite? Maybe. That depends on what you're looking at in this fight. Charles has looked unstoppable. Many people, I know I was talking with a buddy of mine last week. What's up, Ren? Welcome back. I was talking with a buddy while we were out golfing last week. And many times you can't think about Charles Oliveira as Charles Oliveira right now. Why is that? Because Charles Oliveira right now is this specimen. He's become a guy who is unstoppable, but we don't forget about the Charles Oliveira of the past. Why is that? Because Charles Oliveira of the past was undoubtedly unpredictable. We couldn't figure him out. We didn't know whether he was going to win or lose. So I guarantee you that that's one of the reasons why Islam is the betting favorite. Now, let me bring aboard one or two or three. No, just one. of my guests here. We got Jack Goodwillie. I'm going to bring him onto the screen. I'm going to try and move this out of the way and get that widget out of the way. And Jack is here. What's going on, Jack? How are you, man?
Jeremy, how you doing? Good to be seen.
Definitely good to be seen. Never seen each other. Obviously, you've done some writing for the website, MMA Sucker. Why don't you just give people a bit of a background before we get into things here? I've touched on the week that was. I've touched on UFC Vegas 62, Battlefield Fight League. I've touched on the VR. I want to get your opinion on that. But before we get into that, just let people know a bit of your background, man.
Yeah, certainly. So, I'm a 2015 graduate of Temple University's journalism program. I ended up getting into athletic communications after writing for the big newspaper in the city covering high school sports. But I've always been a fanatic of mixed martial arts, which stems from my love of professional wrestling. Probably going back to when I was in high school, 2008, 2009. Um, the Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva feud was kind of like what sparked my whole interest in the sport, and that evolved into staying home on a Friday night and watching LFA on Access, and just getting into every bit about the sport that I love. And I know how you said that MMA is getting to be a bit much for you, just in terms of the sheer volume of events.
Yeah,
I agree. I agree 100%. There's times where I'll be putting together a results page or a preview, and I'll see someone's name, and I'll be like, ah, who is that now? Who is that? And then I got to look them up, and then, oh yeah, that's the guy that fought. Yeah. So it just has to jog my memory that way. It's tough to keep track of everything. It is, but as a fan, it's all you could really want. You don't have to watch everything. You can pick and
100%.
choose. Um, but I think it's good. I think it's proof positive of the evolution of the game.
I do as well. I want to talk about. Did you happen to see any of the stuff about the LFA in VR?
I actually did not. I know that when they were talking about bringing Zuckerberg in for the Mackenzie Dern show, that a possibility was that the UFC wanted to like test VR and test the capabilities and how it can be used in the sport. I do know that Dana White is a fan of VR. He owns an Oculus. I know he loves the boxing game, the cardio boxing game on there quite a bit.
Yeah,
So I know that's going to be something they want to implement in the future. How you do that, I don't know. I'm not, it's not something that's gonna like tickle my fancy necessarily.
for sure.
There's, I'm definitely someone. Even going to events, it can be tough sometimes because. So I was at the Houston UFC with when Oliveira won the title over Michael Chandler. I think it was the second pay per view back from the pandemic, and I kept finding we had good seats, but I kept finding myself kind of going up to the screen,
Yeah,
which kind of defeats the purpose of you know shelling out $200 on tickets, right? So
100%.
um, I don't know. I mean, it depends. Kind of depends on if you look at it as like a glass half empty, glass half full kind of thing. I think.
For sure. I'm gonna throw. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I threw it up earlier. Can you see? I'm gonna throw. This is what the VR looked like. Caposa posted it
Yeah,
on Twitter, uh, and this is sort of what the feel is. As I said, it's sort of cool. You're in on the action, but we had a guy hop in on the comment section and say, "I couldn't believe, like, why would you want to put goggles on during a live event?" This is what he said. I'll throw it up on the screen right here, actually. "For the life of me, I
yeah.
cannot see any value in putting goggles on your face to watch a live event. Like, let alone, I mean, if you have 5, 6 guys over at your house watching a live event, could you imagine throwing goggles on and sort of
I agree.
seeing what you'd look like?"
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. The UFC's as social of a sport as anything. I think.
100%.
When they were running shows during the pandemic, my house of guys, it was like four or five of us. All week was just built up to watching pre-content leading up to the Saturday show, and then getting to experience it with one another, and then it was over. But that the whole that 3 hour block was like the thing that we looked forward to most every week,
Exactly. I
and
couldn't I
we
couldn't
did it
imagine
together.
drinking some beer with goggles on.
Well, maybe beer goggles.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, let's get into why I wanted to have you on. Best bets. This past weekend, you said you did a bit of betting. I had the Alexa Grasso card. Just let me know how things went for you over that card.
It was actually really good. Betting is a game of runs. And I've had some good runs and I've had some not so good runs. This card was one of I didn't play that many fights. One thing that I've been getting out of the habit of is having a bet on every single fight. It can definitely be tempting because for me personally, the whole deal with betting is not so much about making money, but it's about being right and confirming what you thought going in. There's been times where I made great reads, and actually those are the bets that I'm most proud of. But picking your spots is everything. So I only had 4 or 5 bets, but I hit 4 out of 5, and the one that I didn't hit was Mike Jackson, and that was purely a value play. And had he weathered the storm with Pete Rodriguez, maybe that cashes. But it's also
100%.
interesting because I don't have access to live betting out here in California. I have to kind of play everything through my friends back east. Maybe soon, but that would have been a great live betting spot too. If Jackson had made it out of the first round.
You like to do parlays or just one-offs?
It's funny. I was with my brother in Vegas for his first time there after he moved there, and we were at the MGM Sportsbook, and the guy is helping us get set up in the app, and he's like, "Oh, you got to make a parlay. That's how you make all. That's how you really make money here." And I laughed. I was just like, "Oh my god, are you serious?" I only like to play 2 leggers. If maybe I'll go to a 3 legger.
Yeah.
I have friends that like to put a parlay in on every fight of the card and just see what happens. And one time it did get close. He hit every fight, and then Da Un Jung drew Sam Alvey, so that voided, and it probably cost him 10 grand.
See, that's the problem, man, is like you're so into it. And that's the cool thing about betting is it makes you very interested in watching and understanding, but then the stress level is through the roof because you hit, you're there, you got say 10 of 11 fights and you're going into the 11th fight and all of a sudden it crashes. Your whole day goes to shit, man. Like that kind of thing is brutal. The stress levels must be through the roof.
Yeah, it's rough. It's kind of like fantasy football in a way. It,
100%.
once you start betting, it completely changes the way you watch a football game or you watch a fight,
And the problem
for
is,
better and
like,
worse.
I'm a giant Seahawks fan, and everybody out there that knows me knows this. But the problem is say I have Geno Smith in my lineup this week against say or
Yeah,
no, I don't have Geno Smith. Say I have Jimmy Garoppolo in my lineup and they're playing the Seahawks. Fuck, I want Jimmy to get all the touchdowns in the world because I need my fantasy points.
right.
But then my heart wants the Seahawks to win. It's a lose lose, man. It sucks.
Is it a lose-lose or is it a win-win? Because it's kind of like a hedge against your heart.
It's tough to say, man. It's stressful, is what it is.
That's why I bet on the Eagles. If
Yeah,
they win, I make money, and if they lose, I pay to see them lose.
of course. All right, this weekend we got UFC 280. Let's get to the screen share here. It says UFC 281 for some reason. And Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, Peter Yan against Sean O'Malley. Crazy fight card this one is. What are you looking at in terms of best bets?
Well, first, I'll just start by saying this is my favorite fight card of the year. Hands down, this card is stacked from top to bottom. Fighters all over the world. You talk about proof positive of the growth of the sport. Um, look no further than this card because you've got fighters from all over the world at the highest level, up and comers, veterans, established names. It's great. As far as best bets go, I will give out a 3 leg parlay that I like
For a guy
strictly.
who says he doesn't
Um,
like parlays.
well, I gotta do one for the community here. And I was able to find one that I think works. And you want to go with stuff you're really confident in. Now, sometimes there's just not going to be any value on those lines. There is just a little bit of value left on Muhammad Makayev against Malcolm Gordon. I would grab that now while you can before that blows up to minus 900, minus 1,000. Look, Malcolm Gordon has certainly. I think he's overachieved his last couple fights in a way. I did bet him against Francisco Figueiredo. Also had the decision prop on that one, so that was a really nice cash.
No
But
doubt.
I don't think he's in Makayev's league in any way, shape, or form. Maybe even to a lesser extent than his last opponent, Charles Johnson. So you're gonna want that one. I think you're gonna want Carol Hosa too. She can go to the grappling. She likes to stand and bang, but even if she does that, she could probably outwork Lena Landsberg for 3 rounds. I'm not too concerned about that. That's a good parlay piece. And then as far as money line pieces go, with the fighters, I wouldn't touch anything else. I think I really like a lot of underdogs in this card personally. So I would go with instead adding in the over 2.5 of Sean Brady and Bilal Muhammad. That's minus 215. You could even bet that straight if you want to. I just think those guys are so durable and so high level. The high level fights are the ones that tend to go the distance. It's the low level fights where fighters will gas out that tend to not. And those are fun to bet too. But it's one of those things where covering the regional MMA, like I've been doing for you guys back since March now, has really taught me a lesson there. Um, but those are the three that I like for a parlay. And then as far as money line wagers go, I love Charles Oliveira. I maybe a little bit
I was
biased.
just gonna ask, are you touching the main event at all?
Yes. And the way to play that is take him inside the distance. A big thing to betting is learning enough about these fighters to where you can eliminate certain paths to victory. Does Charles Oliveira outpoint Islam Makhachev? No, he doesn't. It's going to be, he can spark him out, like I believe was it Lucas Martins did? No, I think it was Lucas Martins
Yeah.
that knocked out Makhachev. Yeah, that's certainly in play. I think a club and sub is also in play, and Charles is just so tricky on the ground that this is just going to be a lot of fun to watch. So maybe don't play it if you can, but if you do want to play it, um, take Charles inside the distance. If you like Makhachev, I think there's a lot of ways he can win this fight. He can win pretty much every way. I could see him trapping Charles on the ground, pounding him out with strikes, and getting him out of there due to fatigue. I could see him getting on the back, looking to choke out the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and then even winning a decision too. So if you want to maximize your value, take Charles inside the distance. Other than that, I also like, believe it or not, Caitlin Chugagian against Manon
Okay.
Fiorot. Um, Manon is an excellent prospect, but this is going to be the toughest fight of her career by far.
Yeah.
Caitlin is susceptible to big strikers in the division with big power, and Manon certainly got that. However, if that fight happens to get out of the second round and go to a decision, you got to favor Caitlin in that spot. So if you can, juice the orange a little bit more from the plus 165 we're seeing on her, maybe get more of a plus 190, 2 to 1 even. I would go with that. I like Caitlin in that spot.
At all surprised TJ's coming in as the underdog in this one?
He was actually one that I was going to look to give out as a bet. I am a little bit surprised. He certainly looked like a slower version of himself against Corey Sandhagen. And although I do think he edged that fight just barely, it definitely didn't look like the best version of TJ Dillashaw. That being said, this is a great matchup for him. Aljamain, um, he could certainly take TJ down, but it would be quite the sight if he were able to hold TJ down and even get him out of there with submission. That would be pretty wild, and so for that reason, I'm happy to bet on the idea that TJ could keep the fight standing for the better part of 3 rounds and outpoint Aljamain, land the bigger strikes in the feet, and go to a decision. You could take TJ by decision. That might be the better play.
Yeah.
Actually, I did just see that a good friend of mine, great guy, Clint from the Die Hard MMA podcast. He just laid a 5 unit max bet on TJ Dillashaw. Now, for that reason, I'm not giving that out as an official bet because Clint, if anybody in the betting community would know, is absolutely cursed with these types of things. So maybe avoid that one. But I also like Sean O'Malley as a dog.
Yeah.
While I like Sean
Quite the
Brady,
dog too, right?
yeah, he is. Especially for a fight that projects to like stay standing for 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And I would say take the over, but we see these weird things happen in Sean O'Malley fights that I would just kind of lay off the over unders on that one altogether as well.
Those are your betting bets, best bets. Thanks, Jack. I appreciate
Yep.
that. Before we finish things off here, I wanted to talk one last thing. Final thoughts here as we pump this into our talking points. Final thoughts. This past weekend, we had an interesting fight card. We also found out that Bryce Mitchell will now take on Ilya Topura. What are your thoughts on that fight being made? Because it's almost a more difficult fight for Bryce than the original one played out.
Is that official now?
I saw it on Twitter yesterday. I believe it is.
Wow. See, this is one of those things. Like, yeah, the sport's getting so big. Yeah, some things tend to fall through the cracks sometimes, right?
That they do.
Um, yeah. Um, Man, interesting fight. Even more interesting, I think, than Evloev and Mitchell, um, because Topuria's got that big power,
Yep.
and that could be the type of thing that's going to throw a guy like Bryce Mitchell off kilter.
Way big.
Um,
It's much different in size as well. The stature itself is different in comparison to the two.
Yeah, that is true. Now, if memory serves, the last fight Topuria had was up in 155. He was going to fight Evloev, but had weight issues and
Yes.
ended up pulling out of that fight, even though he was like taunting Evloev for not taking the fight initially or something like that. Regardless, he's now going back down to 145. So that's going to be one of those. I'm not too big. A lot of guys like to study the body language and just the physiques of guys at weigh-ins. Don't do that. Like you're just gonna like be doing mental gymnastics all day long, and it's not gonna be fun for you. And you're gonna overthink a bet, and maybe you'll make the wrong play at the end of the day. That being said, you are gonna want to see how Topuria comes in to that fight and how easily he's able to make weight. Um, because it is going to be a 5 round fight, and Bryce Mitchell's going to thrive in that spot, so long as he can weather the storm. We have seen Topuria dominate the grappling against guys like Youssef Zalal, but Bryce Mitchell's a bit of a different beast. And a good buddy of mine who's also heavily into the betting game, he told me this past week that he doesn't see Mitchell losing until he gets to the title, and
Wow.
that's got to be in play, right? With
Yeah.
just how dominant he's looked. Could a submission be in play for him? Maybe. But man, that is a fun fight. What do you think, Jeremy?
I think it's an interesting one. I agree with you in the fact that it's a much more difficult fight for Bryce than the original matchup. I think Bryce would have been able to take Evil down to the ground. I think he would have been able to utilize his grappling a lot easier against this guy. And I think closing the distance against Ilya is going to be much more difficult than the original play. So luckily they're a little ways out from this fight. He's going to be able to train the necessary adjustments. But I don't know, man. I think this one could be a toss of the coin.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing though is when Topuria did use a grappling heavy game plan against the law, he was heaving pretty hard by the third round.
True.
Um, and that's just not going to be an issue for Bryce Mitchell, right? Um, But I'm very curious to see how they match up together on the ground. With Mitchell being as tricky as he is, but Topuria, being able to handle whatever Ryan Hall, probably one of the best, if not the best, um, pure grapplers in the UFC. He was able to handle what he was dishing out. Um, but with Mitchell's, more MMA based grappling, it'll be interesting to see how they match up with one another.
And I'd say Bryce has he's able to close the distance and utilize his wrestling to jiu-jitsu a little better than Ryan Hall, because Ryan just likes to do Imanari rolls and try to get in there funky and flashy, and that doesn't always work because all a guy has to do is sort of stifle that and he ends up on the bottom, which against a guy like Tupuria, that's not necessarily where you want to be with a guy as dominant and heavy on top as he is.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, say what you want about Mitchell's striking, but he did rock Edson Barboza on the feet, I believe, early in that fight. And when that happened, in my head, I was like, this is over.
Yeah.
This is over. Now that Bryce has respect on the feet, these takedowns are going to come like nothing against this guy. So if he could do that against Topuria, it's going to be his fight to lose. Otherwise, it should be close. Could go a number of different ways, and I can't wait. It's coming soon.
It definitely is. Now, final thoughts. As I said, we talked about that. One last thing I want to ask you: we got UFC 280 this weekend, but we've also got. It's a busy fight week. What else are you looking forward to this week that fans can keep up with over at MMA Succa?
Well, we project to have results for, I believe, more than 10 different events this weekend. I personally will be covering both Brave events on Wednesday and Friday. And then, of course, we've also got the big UFC on Saturday morning. Um, and if you're still up for more MMA after that, um, we will be able to accommodate you. It looks like we'll have Combate Global on Friday, LFA Friday, as typical. I won't be able to cover those events, unfortunately, this weekend due to a wedding. But we've also got the one on Prime 3 event um, on Friday as well. Not sure who'll be covering that yet. And then the Road to the UFC events on Sunday, along with a Rise-In. So it's going to
Action
be
packed,
fun.
man. Action packed. Like I said,
Buckle up.
MMA has become far too much. Just like that. Just exactly as I said. Well, that does it for us. This is the first inaugural edition of MMA Church live stream on Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Pacific time. Whatever time it is where you're watching, you might be watching this delayed, so it might not be live. But Jack, thanks for joining me today, man. We'll have to do it again. Just let people know where they can find you in the world of social media, my friend.
Yep, absolutely. Guys, if you want more MMA based content, pro wrestling content, give me a follow on all my social media handles at Jack Goodwillie. One word, that's JackGoodwillie.
All right, folks, that does it. MMA Church Sunday edition. We will be back next Sunday. I will be for sure. Who knows about Jack? But those best bets, make sure you check them out. Thank you to you guys for watching live. Thank you to those people who have commented. We want to keep those going and keep them cracking each and every week. I am Jeremy Brand. He was Jack Goodwillie. That does it. Peace out.